And we are back with the world's foremost luxury cycle tourist, a man who goes by many names, UltraRomance, Poppy, Benedict, but for the purposes of this show, you're going by Ronnie?
Ronnie. Ronaldo is my Christian name.
All right. Thanks for being here with us.
Well, it's great to be here. Thank you, Ian.
I want to start with just luxury cyclotourist. Can you tell me a little bit about what this entails?
Yes, I believe most people would recognize that this the term bike packing, and I don't necessarily. My stance on the term bike packing, it just doesn't roll off the tongue very well. It doesn't sound like a luxury sport, does it? No, it sounds like something that's a little bit more type A, whereas what I do is type B to even D. And so the luxury aspect of cyclotouring, I'm a professional tourist first and foremost. And so I'm more about the journey rather than the destination. So I just like to enjoy my time in the woods and enjoy my time on the bike, and so the luxury aspect comes in, I suppose, in that light.
And you have kind of a different, just relative comfort, I think it's fair to say, than most other cyclotourists or bike packers, depending on the preference of the individual. But one thing that's really striking, anybody who sees you on Instagram, you ride in sandals, pretty much never see you clipped in, usually not in any kind of cycling kit. Can you tell me why? What do you like about this?
You know, I have a strict road racing background. You know, I was as Ian can vouch, I was
a high quality Cat 5. You are the champion of one of Austin, Texas's most revered road races in the Category 5 division.
Category 5 division. I won the Waco Invitational. You have to get invited to that as a Cat 5. I won.
Yeah.
So I've road raced. Okay.
Yes.
So coming from that background, 10, 15 years ago into where I am now was just shedding the clothing that gets in the way of, it's like I look at the clothing as like a middleman between like that idea, like I'm going to go ride my bike, to actually riding my bike. Getting into all that clothing, putting on, because you can't just half-ass it, You're going out, especially in a place like Austin, Texas, where, people have eyes on you. So when I would go out and ride my road bike in Austin, I had to make sure I was freshly shorn, like waxed, and just parade around like a peacock. You have to, your kit has to be fresh, tan lines on point. You just have to have that loft in your cap, all that stuff. Even to the point where it would blow off going downhill. It's too much loft in your cap.
That's
but
an issue,
it's an issue, but it's something that you had to do. And so getting ready for a ride, especially if I add the PAM cooking oil, we used to spray that on to get an extra sheen. You're looking at an hour, of inception of a ride to actually doing that ride. So erasing that, and I know that, that my preparations for that ride might be a little excessive, but for most people, I'd say it's probably like a half hour, right? If you just eliminate that and make it so, like, oh wow, 100 years ago, did people put on chamois and clip in and get on their road bike with wicked skinny tires and go ride like to the grocery store? No, that's ridiculous, and that ends up being like what I was doing, and I was like, why am I doing this? There must be another way. And you think about, well, when I was a kid, I just got on my bike and rode. And so that's essentially what I do now. And I felt like at one time I was maybe at the end of what I thought was cool about like riding a bike around and stuff. And I was just like disenchanted with the whole thing and just like stripping it down like back to basics and just being like, all right, this is how I started to ride a bike. And this is when it was like truly magical. So it's just been kind of recapturing that.
Yeah, and then, for people who maybe aren't familiar with your background but only know you through your Instagram celebrity, your outings, your worldwide exposure, starring in films, being on the Ian and Friends show.
This is big.
There've been some people who've questioned your authenticity. Is this just a facade? And so I have been out with you, and I think one of the things that I thought was interesting was your. This is a passion that you pursued from a young age, being out in the wilderness, exploring the wild, and you actually have the skills. I mean, you have wilderness survival training. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of how you got into that?
Yeah, I went on a number of bike tours just post-college. I went to college in Colorado. I'm only 21, so I graduated really early.
Yeah.
And so I went out and just started, I don't know, I just had like this idea that it would be cool to ride back from Durango to the East Coast where I was living. And so I got on a really like ill-equipped bicycle and just started riding back. And it was before, you were just following paper maps and things like that. And it was very like simple, just listening to like, I brought my 50 CD bookcase.
Oh, wow.
And just strapped to the back in like a Tupperware container on like on an extra cycle with trash bags.
For real, or
for real? This is real. Nice. And I lost I lost the CD case. And
Smashing Pumpkins.
Yeah, I had one CD left, Yanni, live at the Acropolis. If you're going to be left with one CD, that's the one.
Yeah.
Just like experiencing bike touring for the first time like that, totally ill-equipped. Like it was actually an awful experience, and I didn't do it again for like another 10 years. And within those 10 years, I learned all the different, I learned a lot. I learned a lot of what I need and don't need, and I approached it like 10 years later in a much different, like a minimalist approach, essentially. Instead of hauling all this stuff with me, I kind of knew more. So there's that adage that if you, like, the more you know, the less you have to bring, kind of thing. And so that was, I really, really pared down to just like one little bag and just going out for, like 4 or 5 days and just, reading like what water sources were safe enough to drink out of, and I oftentimes have a little water filter with me, and just seeing like what vegetables you can eat out there, like researching like an area that you're going to be going to and seeing like, oh, like what can I eat here? What can I eat off the land here? I don't eat meat or anything, so I would always have to bring in some sort of protein source, but it was incredible with how like cheap I can do it, with just like buying quinoa essentially, and quinoa, coconut oil, and like dandelion greens.
Yeah.
And then you have the sleeping bag that you sleep in, and your sleeping pad. And while this wasn't very luxurious, it ended up being like a really, really cheap way to live, and so it kept me out there. So I would work half the year on a fishing boat and then be bike touring for 6 months, and I just kept doing that year after year after year, and you get better and better at it because you're immersed in it 24/7 when you're out touring for 6 months or whatever, even though I would come back to cities and visit people along the way and whatever. But you really do learn an awful lot about yourself, and you learn about just being incredibly connected to where you're touring because you're moving through it slowly. Like, you're not walking, you're able to still, get certain places that you need to get because you're on a bicycle, but you're still at like a human pace interacting with all of the flora and fauna. And of course, like things happen, you're alone out there or you have some other people with you. And so you have to learn like on the fly, like what how to react to these, potential disasters or risks or hazards or whatever. And so, yeah, just kind of like I've just had, I don't know, I've been given the luxury of time. And so the experience is just kind of comes along with it, I suppose, if that's what you
I mean, I think
on.
being put in those sorts of difficult situations and learning how to get out of them.
Yeah, it's incredibly rewarding. It's so good to we don't test ourselves at all anymore. We're all within like this safety net of society, and I think like that you could become very complacent, and just be. Your day-to-day just happens and it unfolds before you. There are very few variables. There are variables, but they're like safe variables,
Right.
Whereas like we're taught from an early age now that like the outside is like dangerous, and like because it's almost back to like where it was here, 300, 400 years ago, like first contact with like Europeans to like the natives and just like, oh, it's dangerous out there, it's scary. They're like, which it actually was back then. But for certain people, but we're almost back to that where it's being like we're all just we're not interacting with the outdoors. We're not. it's like this element that's like missing out of our lives as we go through it. And there are very few activities that bring us back to nature and like immerse us in nature and like and bring us like an inner peace that I personally can't get anywhere else.
Yeah, I mean, but you've also been trapped in some like serious situations. You know, a blizzard rolls in, or you run out of water, and I mean, I think you know it's important to note that you have actually gone to like wilderness survival classes, and you know that's where you learned how to make a friction filer and some of these key life-saving skills. I mean, for somebody who is going to kind of go off the beaten path, go out in the uncharted wilderness on their bicycle, would you recommend that they have some sort of official training or go with somebody who has experience doing those types of things first? I mean, are there certain dangers to going out and off the paved road?
You might have such a good time you never come back. I always tell people to start with an overnighter. You know, get your what you think you need with you, and bring it for an overnighter, just like to your local state park or if you're lucky enough to live outside of Texas. This is putting down Texas. Not if you're lucky enough to live outside Texas. Texas has.
We take no offense.
Yeah, Texas has little to no public space, which is crazy for a Western state.
Our audience is worldwide, though.
Yeah, it's worldwide.
You know?
Texas has a real Achilles heel when it comes to like adventure cycling because there aren't places where you can actually go to do it. But you know, like long term, like multiple day trips and stuff, without having to pay for a campsite or just be watched by another landowner or like be woke up with a gun or something like that. So those are the real dangers in Texas. Yeah, that's the real danger. That's a danger in Texas. But if you're lucky enough to live in a place that has abundant open space and national forest land or BLM land, which is most of the American West, and even like on the East Coast, we have a lot of state land, which is totally. You can do whatever you want there. I don't know if you actually can, but we end up doing that. It's just no one ever bothers you on the East Coast because no one's really recreating outside. I tell people to go out for an overnighter, see how that feels for you, see how your setup works, and you can get a lot of ideas. And overnighters are so fun, and it's so accessible for most people. Most people can, like a Friday or Saturday night, just get together with your friends and ride out to some place, like set up camp, like make a bunch of food around a campfire and sleep, and then make your coffee the next morning or whatever. It's like an adult sleepover. It's the best. It's just like those are my favorite hangs. It's like the best party to go to.
Yeah, and you don't need to really even worry yourself about your bicycle setup that much for an overnighter.
Totally.
What's always amazed me about what you do is your bicycles, they seem so simple, and I guess it kind of puts it into perspective when you just got a clunky beater with a Tupperware container on the back and rode from Colorado to the East Coast. You know, I guess it's fair to say you've refined the setup, but there's nothing. There aren't crazy bells and whistles with your bike.
No, you know, very, very, as far as like genuine innovation in bicycles, like everything's the same as it was 100 years ago still. Like we haven't come that far. You know, you have like the bells and whistles that are available today, like tubeless is pretty sweet, you know, and you know, arguably disc brakes are great. You know, aside from that though, you know, like sure electronic shifting is fun, but I've got an electronic. This might shock everyone to know, but yeah, I have an electronic shifting Specialized Diverge, and it's
just for touring racing, though, right?
Yeah, I don't know what that's for. When Specialized offers you any bikes you want, you pick the most expensive ones. Yeah. and that, I mean, electronic shifting is sure. It's like fun to press a button and like hear a noise and a bike shifts or whatever, but you know, it's totally excessive and not needed, you know, outside of a racing platform, which is where most of the innovations come from, but not everyone is racing, which is the weird thing. Like how many people actually race who are benefiting off of these like innovations that are just making the bicycle more complicated and less accessible as a result because something you forget, you like lost your charger cable and you can't plug your bike in. How are you going to ride it the next morning? How am I going to shift? Touring and being like self-reliant and knowing how to fix everything on your bike and having it be like the you know, the most like the simplest form of what you can a lot of times it's perceived because old parts fail and it's they're not easy to fix like Ian's saddle today.
Yeah, I did have a little for Brooks saddle. Yeah.
Yeah, but I've got to say, you gave me the pleasure of riding your bike around just the parking lot a little while ago. Massive 666 millimeter wide handlebars, your spec.
Drop handlebars.
Drop handlebars with a massive, is it Poppy's chest?
It's Fabio's.
Fabio's chest, I'm sorry. So Fabio's chest, and it was just this like pure joyous experience of getting on a bicycle where it was, relatively simple setup, but I felt like it could do pretty much anything I wanted it to do. And now I'd kind of like to pivot over to a 5-day project that you have just worked on.